trace is one of the most important concepts in Derridian deconstruction. In the 1960s, Derrida used this word in two of his early books, namely Writing and Difference and of Grammatology. In French, the word trace has a range of meanings similar to those of its English equivalent, but also suggests meanings related to the English words track, path, or mark. In the preface to her translation of Grammatology, Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak wrote, "I stick to trace in my translation, because it looks the same as Derrida's word. The reader must remind himself of at least the track, even the spoor, contained within the French word, because the meaning of a sign is generated from the difference it has from other signs, especially the other half of its binary pairs. The sign itself contains a trace of what it does not mean. One cannot bring up the concepts of woman, normality, or speech without simultaneously evoking the concepts of man, abnormality, or writing. The trace is the non-meaning that is inevitably brought to mind along with the meaning." Derrida does not positively as strictly define trace, and denies the possibility of such a project. Indeed, words like difference, harsh writing, pharmakos, pharmakon, and especially spectre, carry similar meanings in many other texts by Derrida. His refusal to apply only one name to his concepts is a deliberate strategy to avoid a set of metaphysical assumptions that, he argues, have been central to the history of European thought. Trace can be seen as an always contingent term for a mark of the absence of a presence, an always already absent present, of the originary lack that seems to be the condition of thought and experience. Trace is a contingent unit of the critique of language, always already present. Language bears within itself the necessity of its own critique. Deconstruction, unlike analysis or interpretation, tries to lay the inner contradictions of a text bare, and, in turn, build a different meaning from that. It is at once a process of destruction and construction. Derrida claims that these contradictions are neither accidental nor exceptions. They are the exposure of certain metaphysics of pure presence, an exposure of the transcendental signified, always already hidden inside language. This always already hidden contradiction is trace. Metaphysics, logocentrism, difference trace. One of the very many difficulties of expressing Jacques Derrida's project in simple terms is the enormity of it. Just to understand the context of Derrida's theory, one needs to be acquainted intimately with philosophers, such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, René Descartes, Immanuel Kant, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, Charles Sanders Peirce, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Karl Marx, Friedrich Nietzsche, Emmanuel Levinas, Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, and others. Some have tried to write simplified versions of this theory, such as Deconstruction for Beginners and Deconstructions, a user's guide, but their attempts have moved so much away from the original that they have drawn flack from almost all quarters. The best way to learn about deconstruction is to read Derrida's own work. Nonetheless, this short exposition of the relationship between trace and Derrida's project may help orient his readers. Derrida's philosophy is chiefly concerned with metaphysics, although he does not define it rigorously, and takes it to be the science of presence. In his own words, the history of metaphysics, like the history of the West, is the history of these metaphors and metonymies. Its matrix, if you will pardon me for demonstrating so little and for being so elliptical in order to bring me more quickly to my principal theme, is the determination of being as presence in all the senses of this word. It would be possible to show that all the names related to fundamentals, to principles, or to the center have always designated the constant of a presence, eidos arche, telos energia, asia, elethea, transcendentality, consciousness, or conscience, God, man, and so forth. Derrida finds the root of this metaphysics, which he calls metaphysics of pure presence, in logos, which is internal to language itself. He calls this logocentrism, which is a tendency towards definitive truth values through forced closure of structures. In his belief, it is the structure of language itself that forces us into metaphysics, best represented through truth values, closures. Speech is valorized by Socrates in Phaedrus. In fact, according to Derrida, logocentrism is so all-pervasive that the mere act of opposing it cannot evade it by any margin. On the other hand, Derrida finds his Nietzschean hope in heterogeneity, contradictions, absence, etc. To counter the privileged position of the speech of the phone, he puts forward a new science of grammar, the unit of writing, grammatology. Unlike structuralists, Derrida does not see language as the one-to-one correspondence between signifier and signified. It has been necessary to analyze, to set to work, within the text of the history of philosophy, as well as within the so-called literary text, certain marks, shall we say, that by analogy I have called undecidables, that is, unities of simulacrum, false verbal properties that can no longer be included within philosophical opposition, resisting and disorganizing it, without ever constituting a third term, without ever leaving room for a solution in the form of speculative dialectics. Trace is also not linear or chronological in any sense of the word. This trace relates no less to what is called the future than what is called the past, and it constitutes what is called the present by the very relation to what it is not, to what it absolutely is not, that is, not even to a past or future considered as a modified present. Trace is a contingent strategy, a bricolage for Derrida that helps him produce a new concept of writing, where the interweaving results in each element, phoneme or grapheme, being constituted on the basis of the trace within it of the other elements of the chain or system. This interweaving, this textile, is the text produced only in the transformation of another text. Heideggerian dasein and Derridian trace. Derrida's concept of trace is quite similar to Heidegger's concept of dasein, although from different perspectives. Here, we see the relationship between Heideggerian existentialism and the Derridian concept of trace, which, in turn, will also work as an indicator of a very close relationship between existentialism and deconstruction. Derrida's first indebtedness to Heidegger lies in his use of the notion of surature. To write under erasure is to write a word, cross it out, and then print both word and deletion. The word is inaccurate, hence the cross, yet the word is necessary, hence the printing of the word. This is one of the principal strategies of Derrida, of a discourse which borrows from a heritage the resources necessary for the deconstruction of that heritage itself. This is similar to the concept of bricolage coined by anthropologist Levi Strauss. Derrida himself explains, Levi Strauss will always remain faithful to this double intention, to preserve as an instrument that whose truth value he criticizes, conserving all these old concepts, while exposing their limits, treating them as tools which can still be of use. No longer is any truth value attributed to them. There is a readiness to abandon them if necessary, if other instruments should appear more useful. In the meantime, the relative efficacy is exploited, and they are employed to destroy this old machinery to which they belong and of which they themselves are pieces. However, now that we are done discussing this Derridian strategy, let us get back to the concept of surature. To understand it properly, we need to learn about Heidegger's existentialist theories. In doing so, we will also explore the link between existentialism and structuralism. Heidegger said that the possibility of being, or what he called dasein, is the presupposition behind any definition, any defined entity. He comes to this decision through the general problem of definition. If anything is to be defined as an entity, then the question of being, in general, have to be answered affirmatively at first. Before we can think and decide that something exists, we must acknowledge the fact that anything can be. This being is not an answer to a question, as it predates any thought or possibility of thought. If the subject of your thought exists, then the being is always already there. Yet, Heidegger refuses the metaphysicality of the word being, and tries to keep it to the human realm by crossing it out. When Heidegger puts being before all concepts, he is trying to put an end to a certain trend of Western philosophy that is obsessed about the origin, and by the same token, the end. Putting being under erasure is an attempt by Heidegger to save his concept of being from becoming the metaphysical origin and the eschatological end of all entities. Yet, by making dasein, or being, his master word, his function word, Heidegger nonetheless fails to do so. Heidegger's concept of dasein is similar to the structuralist concept of the signified. To put it simply, in structuralism, all signifiers are directly connected to an extra-linguistic signified, the invariable ones. To mean anything, a signifier must presuppose a signified already always outside it. This is what Derrida terms as the transcendental signified. As a signified, it belongs to the realm of language, but by being invariable, and by refusing any movement, it remains outside it. Dasein, by being under the erasure, claims to remain in the realm of physicality, but by being prior and anterior to any entity, and any thought, it remains outside them. In short, Heidegger's idea of dasein fails to overcome the metaphysical trap. Derrida takes almost a similar strategy, but in his case, he puts the concept of trace under erasure. Trace, unlike dasein, is the absence of the presence, never itself the master word. It is the radically other. It plays within a certain structure of difference. To Derrida, sign is the play of identity and difference. Half of the sign is always not there, and another half not that. The sign never leads to the extra-linguistic thing, it leads to another sign, one substituting the other playfully inside the structure of language. We do not feel the presence of a thing through a sign, but through the absence of other presences, we guess what it is. To Derrida, trace not being there, difference and not identity which creates meaning inside language. This is the main difference between Heideggerian dasein and Derridian trace.